Hey everyone, welcome back. Today, we're exploring 9 rare and valuable Washington quarters. These iconic coins aren't just history, they can be worth thousands. We'll show you which ones are most sought after by collectors. Stick around, you might have one of these hidden in your pocket change. Before we get into the rarest of the rare, let's quickly go over the history of the Washington quarter. This coin was first issued in 1932 to celebrate the 200th anniversary of George Washington's birth. Since then, it has become one of the most famous and widely circulated coins in U.S. history. The design is instantly recognizable, with George Washington's portrait on the obverse and an eagle on the reverse. It's not just a coin for collectors, this is a piece of American history that holds a lot of value, both numismatically and sentimentally. First up, let's talk about the 1997 D. Washington quarter, which has become one of the most sought-after coins due to an error that could make it worth as much as $2,000. That's right, this seemingly ordinary coin could bring you quite a bit of cash if you find one with a specific flaw. Now, you might be wondering, what exactly makes the 1997 D. Washington quarter so special? Well, here's the story. When this coin was originally minted, the design was intended to be flawless, just like any other coin that's produced in large quantities. But, as with any mass production process, things don't always go according to plan. Some of these 1997 D. Washington quarters were struck with an error that can make them extremely valuable. These errors come from an issue during the minting process, where the die used to strike the design onto the coin became damaged or worn. The particular flaw found on these coins is known as a die gouge or die crack. Essentially, a die gouge occurs when a crack or chip forms in the die, causing a portion of the design to be overstruck or poorly imprinted. This results in a noticeable flaw on the coin, usually on the obverse, or the front side of the coin, which features George Washington's portrait. Sometimes the error appears as a visible scratch or a raised area of metal where the die was damaged. Other times, a die crack can form, leaving an obvious line or distortion in the design. These imperfections are not easy to spot, which is why many collectors miss out on them or don't recognize their value. But what makes this coin so exciting to collectors is the rarity of the error. Only a limited number of these 1997 D quarters were struck with this flaw, making them incredibly hard to find today. The 1997 D. Washington quarter with a noticeable die gouge or die crack is so rare that it can fetch prices as high as $2,000, depending on the severity of the error and the condition of the coin. In fact, some of these error coins have sold at auctions for even higher amounts, depending on demand and collector interest. So, how can you spot a 1997 D. Washington quarter with this error? Start by carefully examining the obverse side of the coin, especially around the edge of Washington's portrait and the lettering. If you notice any unusual marks, scratches, or lines that seem out of place, it's worth taking a closer look. You'll want to make sure that the flaw is caused by the die damage, not just regular wear and tear from circulation. If you think you've got a 1997 D. Washington quarter with a noticeable flaw, you'll want to get it professionally graded. A professional grader will be able to assess the coin's condition, verify the error, and give you an accurate value. This could help you determine if your coin is one of the rare, valuable ones that collectors are looking for. Moving on to another interesting coin, the 1991 D. Washington quarter. At first glance, this coin may not seem particularly special, especially when compared to some of the rarer and more obvious minting errors we've discussed. However, if you take a closer look, you might just find that the 1991 D quarter is worth far more than its face value, potentially up to $1,680. So, what exactly makes the 1991 D. Washington quarter valuable? It all comes down to a particular minting error known as a double die error. This occurs when the coin is struck more than once by the same die, which results in a noticeable doubling effect on the design elements, such as the date or mint mark. The repeated strikes cause the details on the coin to appear blurry or duplicated. Essentially, the design becomes doubled, giving the coin a distinctive look. For the 1991 D quarter, this error typically manifests as a doubling of the numbers in the year 1991, or the mint mark D on the obverse, which features George Washington's portrait. When the coin is struck more than once, the initial strike leaves an impression, but the second strike shifts the design slightly, resulting in a doubled appearance. This error isn't something you'd spot on every 1991 D quarter, which is why it's considered rare and valuable. Most of the 1991 D quarters were struck properly, but only a select few show this doubling effect. The value of these, doubled die, 1991 D quarters depends on the quality and extent of the error. The clearer and more pronounced the doubling is, the more valuable the coin becomes. Some coins with a strong doubling effect have sold for as much as $1,680 at auction, while others with more subtle errors might fetch a lower price. Still, even a modest doubling error can significantly increase the value of this coin compared to a regular, undamaged quarter from the same year. So, how can you identify a 1991 D Washington quarter with this error? First, start by closely inspecting the date and mint mark. Look for any signs of doubling, especially along the edges of the numbers in the year 1991 and around the D mint mark. The doubling can sometimes appear as a faint shadow or a more pronounced separation of the design elements. The key is to look for any evidence that the coin was struck more than once, resulting in the overlapping design details. If you do find a 1991 D Washington quarter with a noticeable doubling error, it's a good idea to have it professionally graded and appraised. A professional grader can confirm the authenticity of the error and give you an accurate assessment of its value. Many coin collectors are on the lookout for double die errors, making these coins highly sought after in the market. Up next, we have the 1989 P Washington quarter, a coin that may not seem extraordinary at first glance but can actually be incredibly valuable due to a rare minting error. You might be asking yourself, what makes this particular quarter so special? Well, the key lies in an error that occurred during the minting process, specifically, an off-center strike. An off-center strike happens when the coin is not properly aligned during the minting process. Normally, when a coin is struck, the die applies the design to the coin in a precise, centered way. However, when an off-center strike occurs, the design is misaligned, causing the image to appear shifted or partially missing. This results in a coin where the design doesn't line up properly with the edge, creating a distinctive and noticeable flaw. In the case of the 1989 P Washington quarter, this misalignment can make it a very rare and valuable find. The 1989 P Washington quarter with an off-center strike is particularly desirable because of its rarity. Off-center strikes happen when the coin is not perfectly positioned between the dies during the striking process, and while this can happen with any coin, it's relatively uncommon. When you consider that only a small number of 1989 P quarters were struck off-center, it makes these coins highly sought after by collectors. The error creates a unique look, with part of the design being cut off or shifted to one side, making it easily identifiable. What really drives the value of the 1989 P Washington quarter with an off-center strike is its scarcity. While most quarters from this year were struck correctly, only a few with this misalignment error were released into circulation. As a result, the off-center struck 1989 P quarters are considered rare, and collectors are willing to pay top dollar to get their hands on one. In fact, some of these quarters have been known to sell for as much as $1,900, depending on the extent of the error and the coin's condition. So, how can you identify an off-center strike on a 1989 P Washington quarter? Start by closely examining the coin's design. The most obvious sign of an off-center strike is a misalignment of the image, particularly on the obverse side where George Washington's portrait is. You might notice that part of the design is cut off, or that the coin's edges are uneven, with part of the lettering or design being pushed off to one side. The more pronounced the misalignment, the more valuable the coin typically is. If you think you found a 1989 P quarter with an off-center strike, it's a good idea to have it professionally graded. Professional graders will assess the coin's condition, verify the authenticity of the error, and provide a more accurate value estimate. Given the potential for these quarters to fetch prices of $1,900 or more, getting it appraised is an important step before selling or trading it. Next up, we have the 1986 P Washington quarter, a coin that may seem like just another part of the regular series at first glance, but it's actually quite valuable for a very special reason. This coin is part of a series of quarters minted to honor the 50 states, but there's something that sets some of the 1986 P quarters apart from the rest. A rare minting error, known as a die clash, makes certain 1986 P quarters highly desirable and worth up to $3,000. To understand why the 1986 P quarter is valuable, we first need to take a quick look at the history behind the coin. The 1986 Washington quarter was part of a series that celebrated the 50-state quarter program, which was introduced by the U.S. Mint in 1999. However, before the program officially began, the Mint produced a series of Washington quarters to mark the occasion, and the 1986 P quarter was one of these early coins. While most of these quarters were struck without any issues, a small number of them were affected by a very rare error that turned them into much more valuable pieces. The error in question is called a die clash. This occurs when two dies, one for the obverse, the front, and one for the reverse, the back, collide during the minting process, usually without a coin being in between them. When this happens, part of the design from the reverse die is transferred onto the obverse die, and vice versa. As a result, the coin that is struck afterward may show faint or ghost-like images from the opposite side of the coin. These images typically appear in areas where there shouldn't be any design, like the field around George Washington's portrait or on the reverse side. The die clash error is quite rare, and it makes coins like the 1986 P Washington quarter particularly valuable. The error creates a distinctive look that collectors can easily spot, as it results in the ghostly image of part of the reverse design being faintly visible on the obverse. This could be part of the eagle or other elements of the reverse that shouldn't be visible on the front of the coin. So, how can you identify a 1986 P Washington quarter with a die clash? Look closely at the obverse side of the coin, particularly around Washington's portrait and the surrounding fields of the coin. If you see faint, blurry images of parts of the reverse design, like the eagle or the lettering, then you could be looking at a die clash error. The error is subtle, but when it's noticeable, it makes the coin highly collectible and sought after. Coins with this error can be worth up to $3,000 depending on the severity of the die clash and the coin's overall condition. Some die clash coins have sold for impressive sums at auctions, making them a treasure for collectors. If you think you found a 1986 P quarter with this rare error, it's definitely worth having it professionally graded. A certified coin grader can confirm whether the die clash is genuine and give you a more accurate valuation of the coin. Next up, we have the 1981 D Washington quarter. While this may seem like just another coin from the 1980s, some of these quarters have been struck with a distinct minting error that makes them incredibly rare and valuable. Specifically, some of the 1981 D quarters have a die crack or other minting flaws, making them a highly sought-after find for coin collectors. To understand why these error quarters are so valuable, it's important to know what a die crack is. A die crack occurs when the die used to strike the design onto the coin becomes damaged. Over time, the die can develop cracks due to the constant pressure it endures during the minting process. When the die cracks, it can leave a noticeable mark on the coin, typically in the form of a raised line or crack. These cracks can appear anywhere on the coin, but they are especially noticeable on the obverse, where the portrait of George Washington is located. The die crack found on certain 1981 D Washington quarters is considered quite rare, and when it occurs, it can significantly increase the coin's value. While most 1981 D quarters were struck without any major issues, those that feature a die crack or other minting errors stand out as special pieces. The rarity of these error coins is what makes them so desirable to collectors. Because such mistakes are uncommon, collectors are willing to pay top dollar for these rare finds. A well-preserved 1981 D Washington quarter with a noticeable die crack or other minting error can fetch prices as high as $3,000, depending on the severity of the flaw and the condition of the coin. Of course, the more pronounced the error, the higher the value. Coins with a die crack that runs through key areas of the design, or ones that have multiple errors, can be especially valuable. So, how can you spot a 1981 D Washington quarter with a die crack? First, carefully examine the obverse side of the coin, particularly around Washington's portrait and the lettering. Look for any unusual marks or raised lines that appear to be part of the design, but are actually a result of the die cracking. Die cracks often show up in areas like the edge of Washington's bust or the surrounding fields of the coin. If you see a crack running through these areas, you might have a valuable error on your hands. In addition to the die crack, some 1981 D quarters have been found with other minting errors, such as off-center strikes or weak strikes. These additional errors can further increase the coin's rarity and value, making them even more desirable to collectors. If you suspect that you found a 1981 D Washington quarter with a die crack or other minting error, it's a good idea to have it professionally graded. A certified numismatist can verify the error, assess the condition of the coin, and provide an accurate value estimate. With prices reaching up to $3,000 for some of these error coins, it's worth taking the time to get it checked out. Now, let's talk about the 1980 P Washington quarter, and trust me, this one is a real gem. Some of these coins can fetch an absolutely jaw-dropping $10,000. So, what makes this particular quarter so valuable? Well, it all comes down to a rare minting error known as the double die reverse. To understand why the 1980 P quarter is so special, we first need to talk about what a double die error is. A double die error occurs when the coin's reverse design is struck more than once, with the die being slightly misaligned during the second strike. This causes the design to appear blurry or duplicated. It's a subtle but significant error that results in a doubled image, which makes the coin stand out from other quarters. In the case of the 1980 P Washington quarter, the double die reverse error affects the reverse side of the coin, where the eagle and the motto E Pluribus Unum are located. What makes this error so valuable is its extreme rarity. Only a small number of 1980 P Washington quarters were struck with this double die reverse error, and these coins are incredibly sought after by collectors. The doubling effect on the reverse can sometimes be subtle, but when it's noticeable, it's one of those unique finds that coin collectors will pay a premium for. The more pronounced the doubling, the higher the price the coin can fetch at auction. This rare double die reverse error makes the 1980 P Washington quarter one of the most valuable quarters in circulation. In fact, some of these error coins have sold for as much as $10,000, depending on the severity of the doubling and the coin's overall condition. The extreme rarity of these error coins, combined with their condition, makes them a highly desirable find for collectors who specialize in error coins or Washington quarters. So, how can you spot a 1980 P Washington quarter with a double die reverse error? Start by closely inspecting the reverse side of the coin, particularly around the eagle and the lettering. Look for any signs of doubling, which could appear as a blurry or duplicated image. The doubling might be faint, but when it's noticeable, it's easy to tell that the design was struck twice. Pay special attention to the motto E Pluribus Unum and the eagle's feathers, as these areas are usually where the doubling shows up most clearly. If you think you found a 1980 P quarter with this rare error, it's worth having the coin professionally graded. A certified numismatist can confirm the authenticity of the error and assess the coin's value based on its condition and rarity. With the potential to be worth $10,000, it's definitely worth getting an expert opinion. Next, let's talk about the 1987 D Washington quarter. While this coin might not fetch the same astronomical prices as some of the others we've discussed, it's still a valuable find for collectors, especially if it's in excellent condition. A 1987 D Washington quarter can be worth up to $900, thanks to a few minting errors that make it a rare piece among other 1980s quarters. So, what makes the 1987 D Washington quarter special? Like many other coins, some of these quarters were struck with small but notable minting errors that increased their value. Two of the most common errors on the 1987 D quarter are die cracks and off-center strikes. A die crack occurs when a crack develops in the coin's die, and it transfers to the coin when struck. These cracks can appear anywhere on the coin, but they're most noticeable along the design elements, such as around the portrait of George Washington. While die cracks aren't as dramatic as some other errors, they make the coin distinctive and add to its rarity. Coins with significant die cracks can fetch higher prices, especially when the crack is clearly visible and runs through key design elements. Another error seen in some of the 1987 D quarters is an off-center strike, which happens when the coin is not properly aligned with the dies during the minting process. As a result, the design on the coin may appear shifted to one side, causing part of the coin's design to be cut off. An off-center strike can create a coin with uneven edges, making it look unique compared to properly struck coins. While these off-center errors are less common, they're still a highly collectible feature, and the rarer the misalignment, the higher the coin's value. While these minting errors may seem subtle compared to larger mistakes, they're part of what makes the 1987 D Washington quarter valuable. Collectors are drawn to these coins because they're not only a part of the 1980 series, but they also offer something unique that standard quarters don't have. The rarity of these errors, combined with the coin's age, increases its desirability. In terms of value, most 1987 D quarters are worth close to their face value, but those with noticeable errors can be worth up to $900 depending on their condition and the severity of the error. The better the quality of the coin, the higher the price. A 1987 D quarter with a prominent die crack or a strong off-center strike can command a premium, especially if it's in mint or near mint condition. If you think you found a 1987 D Washington quarter with an error, it's a good idea to have it professionally graded. A professional numismatist can confirm whether the coin has a legitimate minting error and give you a more accurate estimate of its value. And last, but certainly not least, we have the 1988 D Washington quarter. This coin might not immediately stand out, but it has become one of the most valuable coins in circulation thanks to some significant minting errors. Some of these quarters were struck with die clashes or off-center strikes, errors that make the 1988 D Washington quarter a highly sought-after find for collectors. In fact, some of these rare quarters have sold for as much as $4,250. So, what exactly makes the 1988 D Washington quarter so valuable? Let's dive into the errors that make it stand out. One of the key errors found on the 1988 D Washington quarter is the die clash. A die clash happens when the two dies used to strike the coin, the obverse, front, and reverse, back, collide without a coin being between them. This results in parts of the opposite side's design being transferred onto the coin. In the case of the 1988 D quarter, the result is often a faint or blurry image of the reverse design, such as the eagle or the lettering, appearing on the obverse side. These ghostly images are highly collectible, as they make the coin look unique and indicate a minting mistake. The second major error seen on some of the 1988 D quarters is the off-center strike. This error occurs when the coin is not properly aligned between the dies during the minting process. As a result, the design appears shifted to one side, causing part of the image to be cut off. Off-center strikes can make a coin look uneven or misshapen, with part of the design pushed off the edge. The more pronounced the misalignment, the more valuable the coin becomes. Off-center error coins are highly collectible because of their rarity and distinctive look. These errors, whether die clashes or off-center strikes, make the 1988 D Washington quarter much more valuable than a typical quarter. As with many other minting errors, the rarity of the mistake is what drives the price. Because these errors are relatively uncommon, collectors are willing to pay a premium for coins that exhibit them. Some of the most notable 1988 D quarters with strong errors have sold for prices as high as $4,250, depending on the severity of the flaw and the coin's condition. So, how can you spot a 1988 D Washington quarter with these valuable errors? If you come across a 1988 D quarter, carefully examine both sides of the coin. For a die clash, look for faint images or ghostly impressions from the reverse design, especially around the edges of George Washington's portrait or near the coin's lettering. If you spot an off-center strike, you'll notice the design shifted to one side, with part of the image missing or the edges uneven. If you think you found a 1988 D Washington quarter with one of these errors, it's definitely worth getting it professionally graded. A numismatist can confirm the authenticity of the error, assess the coin's condition, and give you a more accurate value estimate. Conclusion. There you have it, 9 of the most expensive and ultra-rare Washington quarters worth big money. These coins are perfect examples of how a simple minting error, historical anniversary, or an unexpected flaw can transform a coin into a valuable piece of history. So, next time you're checking your change, make sure to keep an eye out for these rare treasures. You might just discover a small fortune. Thanks for tuning in, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more videos on rare and valuable coins. Happy hunting, and I'll see you in the next one.